Morning, everyone. I am Taylor Post, Swiftland's office manager, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Refresh and Reference Your Interview Skills in Person and Virtually, and today's presenter, Stephanie Rollins. Dr. Stephanie Rollins is a research and writing specialist at the Air University Press at Maxwell Air Force Base. She is also an adjunct professor for the University of Alabama and teaches digital reference, collection development, and organization of information, among other courses. Stephanie serves on both regional and state library committees, and she has 23 years of experience in academic and special libraries. She holds a BA in English from Auburn University, a master's degree in library service, and a doctorate in public administration, both from the University of Alabama. Please welcome Stephanie Rollins and enjoy her webinar this morning.
Thank you, Taylor. Good morning, Deb. Thank you for being here. I'm so excited today to talk to you about something that is what I've spent probably, maybe not billions of hours, but thousands of hours involved in, and that's in my 23 years of being a librarian. I've always had a reference service role. And so about 8 years ago, I was trying to figure out how I could be better, how I could help the patron better, how I could understand and be more empathetic, and what skills I could develop, and what could I do better as a reference librarian. And so that's kind of the goal of today's webinar, is to talk to you a little bit about some of the things that you can do, some things you're probably already doing. You're probably expert reference librarians and have expert interactions. But like I said, about 8 years ago, I was looking at what I could do better, and I basically went back and took a Reference Interview 101 class. And so some of the things I got from that class are going to be included in this. So sometimes going back to basics and thinking about, what I could do better, what are the basics of the reference interview, what skills do I need, how can I do this better, because ultimately we want the person to leave with the answer that they need, right? So those are some of the things that we're going to talk about today. We're also going to touch on digital reference. That's a class I teach at Alabama. And some of the things about that and how that could be different. Is it different? We're going to look at that a little bit. So just so we're all on the same page, we're going to start with oh, no sound? Can anybody hear me? Okay. Okay, I'll keep going then. Hopefully sound is low. Just a second. How about now? Okay, sorry guys, technical difficulties. I apologize. We checked it earlier, it was fine. Okay, so back to basics. So one of the things we're going to talk about is, so that we're all on the same page, is, what is the reference interview? And if you didn't hear me in the beginning, all I was saying was that, I'd been a reference librarian for 23 years, always done reference. And about 8 years ago, I wanted to figure out how I could refresh my skills, what could I do better, all those things. And so I took a Reference Interview 101 class. So I just wanted to include some of those things, plus some of the things that I've learned, some advice I have, what skills you can work on. And so those are some of the things we're going to talk about today. And I'm sure that, our purpose is with the person to leave with what they wanted, even if they didn't know that's what they wanted to begin with, right? So here's a little bit about what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about, what is the reference interview? It's a basic thing, but just so we're all on the same page. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I consider reference interview zen. There is such a thing. How do you start to ask questions? And then I feel how the reference interview is only one part of the interaction. What skills you have. I sent you guys that kind of little checklist, not to make you feel bad, at different times in my career, and even now there's things I need to work on still to this day. But talk about some of the skills that are needed, some activities that promote the skills, and then we'll talk about kind of a brief example. It's a chat example to kind of get you on the flavor of how you can do some evaluations. We'll talk about digital reference, a little bit about that, just a very brief review, some of the issues and promises with digital reference. Is it different? We'll kind of talk a little bit about that. And then some scripting tips that you can pick up on if you do digital reference. A little bit about picking the right resources. Of course, that could be a whole nother 25, 30 webinars just on specific topics. If you want more on that, you can look at DigiRef through Swiftland. There's a bunch of ones I've done and other people on specific topics. A little bit about evaluation, because you're not going to get better, you're not going to refresh your skills unless you practice, unless you get better, unless you evaluate what you're actually doing. And that's kind of the hardest part, is to take a look at what you actually do. And then we'll look at just a chat that's a brief hands-on. I'll give you some final advice, and then I've got some homework for you should you choose to do it. And I've got a bunch of questions that Taylor's going to send you that you can play with if you're interested. So that's kind of the agenda for today. Anybody have any questions so far? We've got a lot to cover. I feel like, we could do a webinar just on what is the reference interview, right? So these are this is kind of an older definition. This is from the Online Dictionary for Library and Information Science, and I feel it's a little bit dated, but it's one of the best definitions that I have seen. So according to this dictionary, it's this interpersonal communication between a librarian and a library user, or sometimes it's a library technician, right? Because we do count on our library technicians to do so much for us. And we're trying to figure out what the person wants. And oftentimes, if you've done this, you know that the question that they finally ask you can be completely different from the reference question they initially started with. We can occur in many different methods, telephone, electronically, and this says usually email, but now of course we've got digital chat. I've seen a webinar on how to do reference interview using Skype, which would be challenging, right? Just strictly technology-wise for some of our users. But usually it's done at the request of the user, the patron. And then what we do, we're well-trained reference librarians, and we'll sometimes have to initiate the conversation in person or virtually if the person seems to need assistance. So some of the best practices. And we'll talk a little bit more about this. This is 7 best practices. When we get to the Zen, I only have 4, and it's a lot easier to remember, and I'll talk you through that. So again, we're just kind of doing a brief review, some of the things that I learned even late in my career that were super helpful to kind of help me refresh my skills. So, of course, we want to be approachable and welcoming. We want to show interest. We want to listen. I think sometimes we get so busy we don't actually listen and become empathetic with our patron. And sometimes we're just so busy. You want to clarify and verify by paraphrasing. And then you want to formulate a search strategy and share it with the user if they're at an appropriate level that they're going to understand. Again, that's a judgment call. Sometimes, they just need an answer and they don't have time to learn, and you don't have time to do instruction. That's all a judgment call. But, if you can share your strategy, they're only going to learn and get better at researching their topics. You want to follow up and make sure they've got what they need, that they're satisfied. And then sometimes, we struggle with kind of closing the interview. Sometimes that's an issue you kind of have to push with the patron. Do you have what you need? Those kinds of things. Okay. So if you came late to the webinar, we are going to have this sent to you, sent to your email, so no worries. You guys also don't have to take a ton of notes because I'm very wordy, so you've got a lot of notes on here, but feel free to do whatever is good for you. So with the reference interview, I've learned to throw out any assumptions that I have about what people can do and what they can't do, and just treat every person as an individual, and just try to assess in person or digitally what it is they need and what skills that they have. And sometimes that's really hard to do. But it's, sometimes, if you work in a college library, you assume everybody's kind of that me, self-centered, but don't assume those things. And, sometimes you have to ask, well, who are our users? And that really defies generalization, right? If you're in a public library and you have in Florida and you have a snowbird visit, I mean, that's not really your typical user that's there year round, right? So you kind of have to throw out any generalizations. And then make no assessments about what people know or don't know or what technology you think they should know and they don't. You know, especially some of those young college kids or those young public library users, sometimes they don't know, right? Okay. The other thing is, you know, question. Be a helpful skeptic. And I know that we are fantastic at this because in the back of my mind, when somebody comes up to the reference desk, I think, okay, what are they really asking? What do they really want? Don't take it at face value. And then what's the depth of their question? I mean, an 8th grade history paper is going to be different than somebody who's starting work on their doctoral level class. And they're not ever going to tell you that, right? There's a huge echo. Okay, let me try something real quick. Is that a little bit better? So again, think about the level of the question that they're asking. Still an echo. Yes, we're definitely detectives. Okay. All right, so I'm sorry, guys. You know, just so many different people connecting from so many different locations on so many different computers. Sometimes you just don't know what the sound issue could be. I know that Swiftland is also recording this, so if you are having some trouble, you can go back, if you have time, of course, and listen to it. So remember I was telling you a little bit about the class that I took, you know, about 8 years ago, even though I'd been in my career quite some time. And again, this was with the aim of refreshing my skills and kind of going back to basics. So one of the things that I really loved, I had a class by Dave Tykeson, and maybe you've heard his name before. And he talks about the 4 R's of the reference interview. And I've renamed this my reference interview Zen because it's so easy to remember. It's kind of like the 3 R's in school: reading, writing, and arithmetic. Um, and so one of the things that he talks about is kind of these 4 R's. And it just kind of helps you remember. It's a lot shorter as far as the reference interview process, and you're more likely to succeed with your patrons, and they'll be more likely to return because you're kind of doing this, you know, Zen, kind of, you know, like when you think about wax on, wax off with Karate Kid, if you remember that movie, you're just kind of performing this cycle, and if you get stuck in the cycle, you go back and you repeat it. Some great things that he had to say. And his 4 R's are reassure, respond, reflect, and repeat. And I mean, I can just see that in my head every time that somebody comes up to the reference desk or I do a digital chat. I just thought it was just a fabulous concept. So we're just going to go through it pretty quickly and give you some examples. And this works, you know, kind of independent of medium, right? Of course, with digital, there's a little bit more you have to do sometimes. So I'm giving you a clue that it's already a little bit different, but you probably know that already. So the first thing you want to do is reassure your patron because let's face it, most times they've Googled it to death and gotten nothing that they wanted. And so they already feel like they're a failure sometimes coming to ask for help unless they've been around libraries all their life or their mom was a librarian and they just know the business and know that, hey, I'm going to get better help. So a lot of times they feel like they just they don't know what they're doing. So it's a huge psychological barrier, right? So sometimes, you know, you want to reassure them and and let them know that they've come to the right place. You know, so when you either in chat or in person, you know, how can I help you? I'm here to help you. You've come to the right place. Once they, you know, come up to the desk, and that's even before you start asking them questions. You know, make sure that they feel important, that their question is important to you. You know, because like I said, a lot of times they don't feel like they're, you know, doing such a great job. And then once you have reassured them, you need to give it to them. And again, going back to that aspect of patrons never really tell you what they want, and there's some tips for that. There's some ways to get to what they're actually asking you, and that's through open-ended questions and closed-ended questions, and that'll help you refine the details. And this is really the heart of the reference interview. This is what you want to practice. So And again, it's also going to save the patron time and save you time if you can get to the heart of what they're really asking. So how do you do that? How do you ask? How do you learn how to ask, right? And so there's some great things that you can do. So to begin a dialogue with somebody, how do you ask them questions? A lot of times, again, they only come when they really need help, right? It's a psychological barrier sometimes. We talked when I was a librarian at Sanford, which is a Baptist college. A lot of times we talked about library anxiety and the students being afraid to ask for help. They just ask their friends, and there's all kinds of studies about that. But again, they don't always ask their initial question, or they might ask more general questions like, where can I find the magazines? But somebody actually really wanted research articles on genetic engineering. And that person may ask because she expects to find articles on the topic, but doesn't know how to identify them through the database. And so if you send that person to just, oh, here's the magazines, you've totally lost what they meant to ask. And so the reference interview is going to be key to helping with that. So you want to begin that dialogue. And I've learned this just not just as a reference librarian, but also as a parent. And one of the things to think about is asking open-ended questions, because if you say, did you have a good day? And they say yes, that doesn't give you any information, right? And I learned that with my sons. So you want to ask open-ended questions, questions that are going to elicit more than a yes or no answer. So, and then things that are going to help you streamline as well, right? Like, where have you looked so far? What kind of material do you expect to find on this topic? Or my favorite, well, tell me more about your day. Or you tell me more about that. And so you can get some more information. At the same time, however, you don't want to leave things open forever, right? So you do, at certain points in your interaction, you want to ask closed-ended questions. So, do you want books or articles? That's kind of a yes or no question. Current or historical? And so between the two, you kind of flip-flop back and forth in this stage, and you can ask people more information and kind of get to the heart of their question. The other thing is, sometimes you can put people off if you ask a question that's not neutral. And what do I mean by that? So, for instance, like a neutral question would be, how do you plan to use that? It sounds real open, caring, instead of, what do you need that for? So thinking about, how you approach people and different things like that. Or, what about this source helped you? Or why did you look in that source? It's like, it just sounds so harsh to me saying that out loud, right? And maybe it's just the way I'm saying it, but think about how you approach people, and you want to kind of ask neutral questions. And because, again, they've got that anxiety sometimes. They already feel kind of a little bit about maybe they're not so great at research. And again, they just don't have the skills that we do. And there's nothing wrong with that. They just need to learn, right? So the third thing you want to do is reflect. And this is when you think you know what the patron is asking for. But that's not always the case at this point either. So again, what you do here is in chat, you actually have to restate the question because you don't have that person in front of you. But in person, you could say, oh, so if I understand you correctly, you're looking for this. And when you do that, a lot of times, of course, they will add more information. And then you would, again, you could repeat sometimes you have to go back in the reference in and start over. So you kind of go back and start the process over again if you have new information. You reassure the patron, you respond, you reflect, and this may take a couple of different times. And so I really like this process. And to me, this process is independent of the way that you communicate, whether you're in person, whether you're on a telephone call, chat, Skype, email, whatever it might be. It's just that the interpersonal relationship is going to be a little bit different sometimes within that medium. And you guys know that. So for me, the reference interview is key to what we're talking about today. However, I don't think it can operate independently of the entire reference interaction cycle. And these are kind of my tips. This is just Stephanie Rollins talking with some of the information from Dave Tykeson and the things that I see. So for me, in order to refresh and refine my skills, it takes practice. And I'm 23 years in, and I still feel like I need to practice. And I hope that doesn't scare you or depress you, but that's just because I want to do so much better for my patrons, the best that I can, so that they'll come back, right? So my whole idea of the reference interview and refreshing your skills centers around practice. So the first things you want to do, first thing that I think about is, do I have the skills necessary to perform this reference interview? What things do I need? And then part of it, once I do have those skills or I work on those skills, I want to do a skilled reference interview. I want the flow of the interaction or the chat, if it's digital, to go well with scripting and things that we commonly say in person or digitally. I want to pick the right resources. I want to search effectively, and maybe I also want to instruct a little bit, do a little bit of instruction with the patron, and then I want to evaluate what I'm doing. And when I go through the evaluation, that leads me again to improve or assess my skills. So this is just my model. It's not scientific. It's not scholarly. It's just after 23 years of looking at things, what do I need to succeed for reference interview? What do I need to succeed? What do I need to do better? So hopefully that makes sense to you and that's helpful. So to break it down, when we're talking about the skills that are needed to succeed, you need some technical skills, communication skills, and reference skills. And with those three, you're going to have happy patrons. Maybe they won't jump up and down in the air, but they'll be happy. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, and this is your chance to talk to me, not talk, but I guess you'll be typing, a little bit about what your skills are. And we'll go through them. If you didn't have time to take the self-assessment, that's absolutely fine, because we're going to go through it just a little bit. And I'm going to talk to you about my skills, and if you want to, please chime in with your skills. Did you guys take the self-assessment? Was it helpful or not helpful? I do it periodically, and depending on what new technology is out there, I kind of flip-flop between the different categories. Okay, great, fantastic. And I think if you have new people or people who are new to the profession, it's a good thing for them to take too, because you can see where they are. And as we go through it, if you want to chime in with your strongest skills or the ones where you need further development, Tina, don't worry, you're going to learn. And I'm still learning, right? So it's fantastic. And it's just for self-awareness. It's not to make you feel bad. Hopefully I didn't make you feel bad. That wasn't my point. But just to kind of see, well, where am I? What do I need to work on? And then you can make a plan, right? So anyway, and then I wanted to know if you felt like there were any skills that were missing from this assessment. So you can email me or you can type in the chat. But we're just going to go through them real quick. And so what I sent you was this kind of what I called Competencies for Skilled Reference Interaction Self-Assessment. Wow, that's a long title. But what I wanted to know, based on these technical reference or communication skills, where you found yourself. So even for me, there's a couple of things where I'm not at the detailed level. And detailed means basically you know it in and out and you could teach it to somebody. The basic is aware. I know about it. I can explain it, and I could definitely do to find more out about it. Understand means you can write or effectively talk about it, and then ability means you can perform it pretty well. And then detailed is like somebody like me who can teach it on different things, right? Yeah, Taylor sent it to you, but I'll have her attach this and the other when she sends the PowerPoint. But definitely, we will get it to you. But it came with the announcement of you're registered for the class. But if you registered as a group, maybe you didn't get it. So I will, and you can also email me directly at the end. I've got my email. So whatever works for you, we'll get it to you. But we are going to go through it. So just in case you didn't get it, these are some of the things that you need to be aware of. So I'm going to talk to you about them quickly, and then I'm going to kind of comment on, like just so you know, so you don't feel alone, that I still have some work to do, right? So I'm not the fastest typist. I've gotten so much better over the years, but you basically need to be able to type on a computer, and I'll talk about some things that will help with that. We got to be able to have multiple software applications open and work between them. While you're running the reference desk, right? Or running the reference desk and doing digital chat and having somebody come up to the reference desk, right? So it's kind of a crazy time. How to access the internet, use email. My situation was weird because we have military email and there's some things you can and can't do. So if you have a special snowflake email, That's something to consider. And then, how to connect to the web. Sometimes that's a big issue on a military base. You can't even get on. Um, what I would say, it used to be you needed to be able to use one web browser. And now, I would say you need to be able to use at least two, because if one of them doesn't work, and I would actually say I would, I know how to use four or more, because I always seem to, if it doesn't work in one, I'm going to try a different one. And some of them have these plugins that are fantastic that the other ones don't have, right? So you need to be able to use at least two web browsers. And then, you know, basic technologies that an in-person user would use, like what software, what kind of things would they use? Are you able to use them? Or are they able to use the things that you have? I mean, some people aren't on Windows 10 yet. So what kind of software do they have? What kind do you have? And what kind of things might they be limited by software-wise? So just kind of being aware of who your users are and kind of the software that they have. So technical skills to continue a little bit. If you do digital chat, you really need to be able to figure out how to use that chat system and all the options, especially if there's a way to do scripting. That's only going to save you time and make you look better for your user and help them to do the chat faster. And how to connect with it. How can you send documents to somebody, whether it's, I still fax. I don't know about you guys. There's still people out there that do faxing. But how can you scan and send a document? Do you have like a huge copier? I mean, these are basic things, but you'd be surprised. How can you transfer options, transfer files? What common file formats? If I get to a Mac, this is something I need to work on. If I get to a Mac computer, I'm a little bit hopeless, so I need to work on that. But what kind of files are out there? And this is just a few. I know that there's more. Again, I talked a little bit about my .mil situation with the email. What other email systems are out there? I have like 12 email accounts, because it just is super helpful to have those when I can't send it from my military email. I know I can use my Gmail, I can use my Office 365, all those different things. Yeah, exactly. You can, and count on your IT staff. That's a great point. Yep, absolutely. Okay, I'm just looking at the chat. Sorry, I got distracted. And then this is what I need to work on, because I know that there are a lot of toolbars and plugins that would save me a ton of time. I have a few of them. I have Zotero. I have, what else do I have? I have Grammarly, and I have Perfectit, because I do my job now. I do a lot of editing. But there's so much more I could do, I know, with plugins and toolbars. So I'm probably on the awareness, maybe a little bit higher up on some of the toolbars, but those are things that constantly change, and I feel like I need to be more aware of. Again, how to scan and print things and transfer files, very important, because we do a lot of that now, especially sometimes if you work in the special collections, they can't get to something. You need to be able to know that and how to keep and protect the document. And then, you always want to keep learning. Sorry, I skipped ahead too fast. You always want to keep learning about these skills. So today, hopefully this is going to be perfect for you in terms of communication. And always keep practicing. Always keep learning about reference skills and knowledge. And then, when to use, again, I talked to you a little bit, and this is just something I've learned, how, why, and when to use good reference interviewing skills and techniques. And that's, again, a judgment call, right? Based on the patron that's in front of you. To empathize with the person in front of you. Throughout my career, I'll be honest, there have been times when I was not as empathetic with the person as I could have been, because I was stressed or busy or burnout. And so you always want to keep that empathetic level up. Because remember, this person came in feeling already, a lot of times, like they didn't know what they were doing, or they realized that they needed help from an expert. So they're already there. They're already on your side. So be on their side too. And I just have to give myself a little kick in the butt sometimes. So hopefully, that's not something that happens to you, but I'm just trying to share with you. We definitely want to avoid jargon. I work in a military library, so there's acronyms and jargon on top of the library jargon. So I really need to think about, what level my user's at, and try to avoid jargon. And then how to, how to project this professionally. You always want to be professional, whether you're in person or online, those kinds of things. And then, try not to make judgments. It's hard sometimes. Try to be professionally objective. And sometimes, again, I struggle with this, but I do my best. And if you're in a chat, reading skills. Make sure you read quickly, and make sure that you show that you're listening. And again, that gets to the zen of the reference interview, to make sure that you're responding, to make sure that you're reassuring, those kinds of things. And avoid that silence. If it's a question you get and you're like, oh gosh, don't stall, don't freeze. Fall back on that reassuring and responding until you can get a handle on, okay, I know I can do this, I can find this. I may struggle a little bit, and I don't think it's a problem to show people that you're struggling a little bit, because that's part of research. And then, when is a good time to teach somebody how to do something? Sometimes there's just not time, they're not interested, and again, that's a judgment call. And then, when to let something go. When you're over your head, it's on something on a doctoral level, or it's something that only this certain person in the library knows. It's okay to do that. It's okay to let it go, and make sure that you have that in place, how to figure out when you need to follow up at what level, and when to request a consultation with somebody who's better at it than you, or they're a subject matter expert, whatever it might be. Know when to do that. All right, reference skills, and these are things that we pretty much know, I believe. Again, how to be approachable and enthusiastic. You really need to look at your reference policies from time to time, especially if you switch jobs or you switch departments, you're a cataloger and then you switch to reference. Whatever it is, make sure that you look at your policies, because some libraries are different about patrons using databases, sending files, different things like that. So know your reference policies and review them every once in a while. Have knowledge of ready reference, core reference sources that are available in print and electronic. There's some things specific to Florida I already know that are only available in print, right? And then you want to know, kind of what we're talking about today, is how to have good reference interviews, how to analyze reference questions, break them down, think about the resources, think about how to talk to people. And then how to evaluate resources. We look at that all the time. How to do flexible search strategies and share those. Sometimes we're limited by Google. We don't know what their algorithm is. They won't share it with us. But realize kind of the limitations of some of the search engines. And then I would say not just how to search in a search engine is key, but how to do it in at least 2 or 3 different major search engines, because they all do things differently. We love Google, but there's also a place for Bing. There's also a place for DuckDuckGo. There's also some deep web search engines that are fantastic. So those are just things to think about. And again, like I said, some of the scopes and limitations of them. Again, what access does somebody coming in your library have to some of the libraries that you pay for, or some of the databases that are provided by the state of Florida? Well, what if they're not from there? Again, so these are things that you need to be aware of and assess when that person's in front of you. Again, so some of the same things that we've already talked about. So what can you do? One of the things I did is I actually took a typing course. I'm not proud, but there's free ones on the web that you can take, and that'll make things faster for you if you're not a great typist. Also, some of the things you can think about, there's some free, even in some of the databases, I think in the State Library of Florida, but if not, some of the libraries in Florida have the Learning Express. But there's some databases where you can take a speed reading class or get a speed reading book. And sometimes that's helpful as well. Not just for doing digital chat, but just for looking at things in reference sources, for looking at things on the web. I probably read like 400 words a minute, and that's just a skill I have, but I had to work at it. So that's something to think about. I have role play on here twice and practice, so apparently that was really, really important to me, and I can't stress that enough. And so also you want to evaluate your interactions, and I've got some tips for you on how to do that. You also want to look at your chat transcripts and evaluate those. And I've got a tool for you. It's not perfect, but it's something that will help. Practice multitasking. When you're by yourself, we multitask so much, but practice and get good at it. One of the things I need to look at is I kind of don't tend to watch the how-to videos. I just kind of get into something and play with software. But if you look at the short 2-minute videos, it's only going to help you understand software features. So at work, we're moving to an Office 365 environment that's on the web. And so that's been kind of a huge learning curve for me, but I've mastered how to do OneNote and SharePoint. So review the software features because they're only going to help you be faster for your patron. Look at some of the browser extensions and play with them. Share them with your colleagues. Of course, practice the 4 R's that Tychison talks about. And then one of the things I wish I had more time for was to look at the database tutorials for like EBSCO and ProQuest because they are always updating things, right? So those are some of the activities that can promote skills. I've got a few more. This is something that I do with my students, and they call it, we call it sudden death because I set the timer for 15 minutes, and they are so intimidated. And so this is digital reference, but you can also do this live. So one of the things I suggest in terms of practice, and this is your homework should you choose to accept to do it, so either in a chat room or in person, have a group of 3 people, one person who plays the librarian, one person who plays the patron, and then somebody who just kind of observes. If it's in a digital environment, the observer is just going to see the chat. That's all it is. But if it's in person, that person can kind of sit back and watch. And then each person serves in each role. So you could use Facebook. If you have a digital chat service, you could actually go on to that and pretend. And I've got an attachment that Taylor's going to send you or email me directly of 154 just random reference questions that you can pick from. And you don't have to tell the person the question ahead of time. You just pretend like you're the patron, right? You can be as vague or as specific as you want to be. So your observer is going to take notes. I've got a reference interaction form for the reference transaction, includes the reference interview. And you just kind of evaluate on them, on the person, on the librarian. And so this is just something I tell my students before they start, just to kind of help them. What background has the patron provided? Where are they? How can you figure that out without being creepy? Whether they come into the library or they're in a chat room. And then summarize the main questions when they ask through the chat. That's kind of, responding and restating the question, and reassure them throughout the chat. And then my favorite thing is to teach them how to fish. Again, it's a judgment call. And what do I mean by teach them how to fish? So if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. If you teach him to fish, he'll eat for life, right? And so I've always tried to include some instruction about what I did, the databases I used, subject headings and keywords. But again, it depends on the patron, right? It depends on what they're asking, how much time they have. So some more things you can do. Of course, don't ever stop learning and training and going to webinars. And then some of the things I do, if you need advice, if you need help, of course you can always ask me, but also participate in those old school, discussion lists. They're still around. Everybody still uses them. It's where you find jobs that you didn't see on the internet still to this day. Again, like I said, review your reference service policy, analyze questions. I'm going to give you 154 of them if you want them. If you don't want them, that's okay. But analyze them, develop search strategies, find tutorials on databases and practice. Okay, so that's a little bit about some of the skills. So I just want to talk a little bit about the digital reference interview and what it's like and what is digital reference. I'm sure everybody's aware of it, but just a little bit of review. So this is the ideal interaction, right? This is my dog Jack and my husband Greg. And so this would be, if you had digital reference, the person could see what you're doing, they could talk to you, they could look at you, right? That's not part of the case of digital reference. So I've got a long list of different things it's called. If you've heard of something else, type it in the chat window. But Ask a Librarian, chat reference, Ask Us, web-based reference, live online reference, ask, what is it called in Florida? Is it, somebody tell me. But those are some of the things that it's called. So if you've heard something else, let me know that's really catchy. Ask a librarian. Perfect. Yep. So where did it come from? So I remember back in the day, and this is going to date me because Sears is no longer, right? But back in the day in the 90s, I worked at a call center for Sears where people would call from the catalog and order stuff. And so those are kind of some of the origins for. Did anybody ever do that? Am I so much older than everybody? So those are some of the ways that kind of this idea of, where would we be today without it, right? The digital chat and getting help online. But that's kind of where it started. Sears is still going. Okay, I thought they closed. They closed a lot of their stores in Alabama. Maybe that's what I was thinking. So, anyways, that's kind of where it started. Kind of that live help. And then now they have, chat software that's called instant messaging, all those things. Um, so those are some of the things that came from. And now, of course, we have Skype. People do reference on Skype. I haven't tried that yet. I don't know. Has anybody done reference on Skype? I'm just curious. Um, let's see. So what kind of forms does it take? Digital reference can still be considered things like email and forms, right? That's still kind of part of it. But when we really talk about it, and what I think about digital reference is electronic and live. So email can be kind of inefficient because you don't have that back and forth. And sometimes if it's over the weekend, nobody's there, right? So it can kind of create a delay. My favorite is the live digital reference. And it's not synonymous with 24/7 reference, although some people do have that. And the thing is, I don't know about you guys, but we never had hardly any overnight reference questions come into chat or anything like that. So what are some of the goals of digital reference? To meet people where they are, right? We talked about that at the library at the university all the time. Whether they're in the library, where they're online, we want to meet them where they are, where they're searching. And we want to keep pace with their demand for technology, right? The other thing is, a lot of libraries have declining reference questions in person. And I don't know if that's the case for you. Some libraries don't. I found that out too. And so live real-time reference is kind of a proactive way, like, hey, we're out here, we're ready for you. The limitations of the physical reference desk. And again, this is especially true because people experience a lot of frustration trying to find information. It's also got fantastic possibilities for serving distance learners. And so I've done a few things where I've done a full-on digital chat with somebody who was in nursing that was in I don't know, Maryland or something like that. But sometimes it's difficult. It's a little bit removed, and we could talk a little bit more about that. Another thing that I love, and this is a side passion of mine, is serving people with disabilities. How can you accommodate people who can't, say, get into your library for some reason, or it's difficult to get to your library? They can have their own computer set up and chat with you, make their screen as big as they want, or make their screen reader talk to them as you're going through the chat. And it's also a way to connect with younger people. It's just something that's for a lot of them is familiar, right? And that's kind of hit or miss too. I've found some students who don't chat. So things to think about. Don't assume, right? Again, it's also a way to show how fabulous we are. It shows our skills. We can function as guides in this electronic world, just like Google. And I love this quote by Justin Reich. He says, as online resources become more complex, we need wise humans to help act as guides. Librarians know how to do that better than you. Ask them for help. They are also typically warm, curious, helpful people. So again, it's a way to show our skills, to show that we're still relevant, that we can help you whether you come to the library or not. We can meet you where you are. And again, it's a way to show instead of tell. Teach them to fish. Get them down the information literate highway. And it's also a way to build relationships, because every successful interview that you have that's live on chat, they're going to come back and seek help from you. So what are the challenges? That's all the great stuff, right? What are the challenges? For some staff and some patrons, it's a high learning curve. What is this window? What does it do? I don't understand. The Skype, I can't even imagine that level of reference services yet for some of the people that I've worked with. I don't know about you guys. But it can be intimidating, right? Not only are you trying to find information and you didn't do so great, now you're entering into this new technology that you don't understand, trying to get help. So it's another layer. So that can be, kind of a challenge. They don't often understand what the service can provide. Is it going to be, excuse me, a quick reference question, or is it, hey, is the library open? You know, so what is it you're doing here? They don't understand sometimes. You've got to have excellent reference interview skills, technical skills, and those communication skills. Even more so, I think, in the digital environment, because I feel like I'll get to that, sorry. But a lot of times, because it's often hard to determine the tone and the satisfaction because you don't have that person in front of you, you don't see their body language, you don't see them smile, you don't have that eye contact, and you can't hear them, right? So maybe that's where reference Skype would come into play. There's a lot of time involved in digital reference. As opposed to talking to somebody that's much quicker, you have to type it out and you have to get a response, all the while showing that you're listening and that you're reassuring them. Sometimes, getting buy-in from staff and administration is difficult because it does take so much more time. You have to learn the technology. It's another service that you're providing. However, and the other thing too is if you don't market it, if it's like 6 layers down on your homepage, it's not going to be a success. On the other hand, it could be a huge success. Has anybody had a huge success with their digital chat? If so, please type in your chat window. We found it to be helpful, the places I've used it, but it wasn't overwhelming. It was just kind of like another service. And then the other question to ask is, does it work with 508? Can people with disabilities use it? Is it something that's going to be helpful that they can use, or are they going to not be able to use it because of some software limitation? Okay, so when I asked my students the most important things about digital reference, the things that they found most effective were, don't tell somebody, just Google it. Ask people what's the assignment, check in with me, follow up, don't leave me hanging, make me comfortable and connected, show a way to smile while you're typing. So those are some of the things to think about that they thought were important in terms of effective digital reference. Okay, so is digital reference different? And as we go through this, please feel free to type. Feel free to talk to me in the chat window. So for me, I do the same exact thing that Tykeson talked about. I use the 4 R's, and sometimes I have to repeat many times this cycle. So I just want to show you, this is an abbreviated chat, and just to kind of show you the 4 R's and what they look like. I've got a longer chat later that I'm going to have to hurry on because I want you guys to be able to kind of evaluate it. So this just kind of goes through it. It reassures the patron, asks open-ended questions, asks specific questions, and then it has a closing. So this is just very quickly for you to look at kind of applying what Tykeson looks at in the digital chat. Okay, so this is just kind of getting started, starting searching with the patron. All right, scripting can help, especially in digital reference, where you can have a set script in your software, or even just a Word or text file where you have all those things saved so you can actually save time on some of these things. So these are just some of the things that I actually used in chat that I had saved. Okay. So, like I said, we're not going to spend a lot of time about this, but think about the right resources for your patron, but also think about what they have access to, because, like at Sanford, if they came in and were in person in the library, they could use all our databases, but remotely they were not allowed to because of the contracts that we had set up. Think about, where they are. Is there a state library they can use where they are? Because we do get chats from people that are out of state in different states. Discovery and federated services, and Google Scholar, if you can use those effectively, those are only going to help you because sometimes that patron is not in your network and you've got to still help them and find free things that would help them. Now I mentioned earlier a form, and I know this is way too small for you to see. It's just the whole form on one page. We're going to go through it real quick, and then I'm going to let you guys evaluate a chat that's kind of a mock chat. It's not a real one, but it's just kind of something for you to look at. So this is something that we actually used at Sanford. once we finished a chat. And people would enter how they did on their chat. And then I used these statistics and made a report at the end of the year. Anyways, more than you needed to know. But this kind of takes the part, whether it's a chat or even if it's an in-person situation and you're trying to evaluate, you could definitely use this. So the first thing that you're looking for, virtual or in person, is you want to greet the person and indicate that you're willing to help. You know, if you're on the reference desk, that's pretty easy to spot. You look at the person, you smile. In chat, you're going to have to do a little bit differently, and I'll show you kind of what that looks like. The reference interview. So if you look at this form, the top line is the best response. As you go down, it's kind of a worse rating, if that makes sense to you. So the top is great, the last is not good. And it's not that you've done anything wrong, it's just now you can identify where you might need to work harder. Again, we want to assess, we want to refine our skills, we want to refresh our skills. The only way to do this is to practice and look at what you're doing and work on your skills. And that's Stephanie Rollins. That may not be the best answer in the entire world, but this is what's worked for me, and hopefully it'll work for you. So again, how was the reference interview? So how was the greeting? So the best answer would be personal greeting is sent and they're willing to help. How was the reference interview? They clarified the question and showed that they understood the question. Next up is what did you look at with the 4 R's? And so, you know, you can actually go through all of these. You know, basically the librarian restated the question. That was it. That's not so great. But the ultimate here would be 1 to 3 was repeated more than 1 time. And so that would be fantastic. Quality of sources, 1 or more sources was used, and it seems to be appropriate for the patron's research. And then, of course, as it goes down, it kind of gets worse on this one. And there's not too many questions, so I don't want you to feel overwhelmed. Factual information. They provided information and a source. Sometimes people say, oh, here's the answer, but they don't give you a source, right? They give you a partial answer. Was there any instruction provided? And then sometimes there's not time for instruction or it's not applicable. But detailed examples, how to create search terms, which databases to search. Maybe they give you a citation, those kinds of things. And then interpersonal. What did you observe? Welcoming atmosphere. And it's pretty explanatory, whether it's in person or in chat, you know, without too much, you know, silence, right? And then how was the closing? It's very important to close your interview. Sometimes in chat, it's difficult to know when to close, but you just have to go for it and type it out. Same thing in person. You know, do you have what you need? Okay. So we've only got about 8 minutes, and hopefully it won't take us that long to do this. But if you would go ahead and pull this up, or if you just want to follow through, that's okay. You're going to get a copy of this. You can, I'm going to type this in the window real quick. Hopefully I type it right. And you can click on it. Let's see. Hopefully that will work for you. And you can just have this up in the background, but don't hit submit. If you hit submit, the form will submit and you'll have no way to look at your responses because it just goes to, like I said, it goes to a place that you're not going to be able to get access to. Okay, so I just want to go quickly through a dialogue, a situation, and this could happen in person or it could be a chat, but I just want to, did the link work? I hope. Did I type it wrong? Okay, so just have that up. Okay, good, fantastic, it worked. Yay, okay. So you can play with this. Like I said, if you hit submit on it, you're going to lose it, but you know, you can download this as a PDF, whatever you want to do, print it out, and when you role play, you can just check on it. So this is a sample chat. It's just a mock chat. I don't go through every single thing, but just pretend that this librarian was excellent and they sent them all kinds of instruction and websites and all kinds of stuff. But just in terms of looking at, you know, evaluating this chat, I was trying to figure out a way to do some hands-on when we don't really have a place to do hands-on, and it would take forever if I just revealed the line that's in red on every single slide. So we're just going to go for it, and hopefully this will be something that can help you. So first thing you want to do is you want to initiate a friendly greeting, and I always recommending using names if the person has a name, if they give it to you, and I always give them my name. because you're in such a, in chat at least, you're in such a kind of digital environment, it seems very impersonal. So yeah, we can definitely send the PDF. Absolutely, Abby. So you want to have a friendly greeting, and I always use names. And so the patron says, I need some information on how to protect my company. Well, that's huge, right? And so what you say is, well, that's an interesting topic. So you're reassuring, right? We have lots of information. And then it asks an open-ended question. So that's something you do. And they refine a little bit. I need information on computers. Still not so great on the patron, but they don't know what they're asking. And so the patron again reassures. Are there tips on sites or software that you're seeking? That's more of a closed-ended question, but again, you're still reassuring the patron. I'm trying to figure out what kind of software or settings I can use to protect our computer network. So that's a little bit better. And so again, you want to reassure the patron. I can definitely help you find information. And then thinking about things, are you interested in cybersecurity? Because that's kind of a topic where this falls. And again, you're reassuring the patron. The patron explains with a few more specific details, and then this is where you're restating, right? So just to sum up, you're looking at cybersecurity for your company and possibly some tools that you can use to protect your company. Yes, that's it. So it's never that quick, I promise, but you get the idea. And so one of the things I always do, try not to be creepy. If they're in person, it's a little bit easier, but I always try to figure out what library they're at, so that way I know what databases they can use, right? And so the thing that you want to know is, how much time they have. You want to reassure them that you can get through their question, but sometimes they're in a hurry, and that's good to know up front, so they don't just disconnect out of the chat. Same thing in person, are you in a hurry today? So that way you can tailor it if you have to, or you can spend more time with the person. And then I also, with chat at least, I always give them my email because sometimes technology just fails, right? And so they say, I use Lee County Library and I have plenty of time, which is the best answer, right? And so then you want to reassure the patron again. You give them a website, you tell them what search terms you used, and then you want to reassure them in chat that you're not leaving them forever, that you give them a time frame that you're going to come back. So it's just something to think about. So yes, this is on the right track. You ask them if they have enough resources to get started. You go through the 4 R's again if you have to, and then you want to start working towards your closing. And so you start doing that. Again, I give them my email. I thank them for chatting with us and say, please chat with us again. And then the chat ends. So very quickly, what did you observe? So if you want to type in the chat window, we have just a couple minutes, and I'm almost done, so it's perfect. But how was the greeting? Was a personal greeting sent and indicated willingness to help? I know this was really quick, but hopefully you've got something quickly. Yep. Yeah, first names should be enough for patrons. I think so too. Or they don't. It's a personal judgment thing. It's just me. I want people to know I can help them and let them know who I am. But that, yeah, it just depends on you. So that's not a fast rule that you have to use your name. So would you say a personal greeting was sent and indicates willingness to help? First on each one, okay? Okay, sorry you're not able to open the link. I tried to do that so it would be shorter and you wouldn't have to, I wouldn't have to type a really, really long link, but we'll get that to you. It will open on your phone probably. So the reference interview was clarified. And then, I think the 4 R's were there. You guys tell me what you think. And then you didn't really get to see the quality of the resources, but pretend that they were there. And some people have to go, so we'll just go through this very quickly. I think the chat provided information and the sources. Yeah, again, that was very dubious, Elizabeth. It was just for illustration purposes. And then, was there instruction? You guys didn't actually get to see that, but pretend there was. And then, was there a welcoming experience overall? And then, was there a closing? And I definitely showed you a closing. Was it the best chat ever? Maybe not, but again, that's why you practice, that's why you evaluate the chats. So, just very quickly, as I go through kind of my closing, did you feel like the digital chat, because that was a chat transcript, is different? And if so, how? And I'll just keep talking because I've got like 1 minute left. And just some final advice I have for you. You know, use the reference interviews in person or when virtually. Know your institution's resources. Know what your patrons can and can't use. Know those free resources that are available if they can't use your pay resources. Learn the shortcuts. Use my chat form, and I'll send you the long link too, in case you can't do the bit link. And assess your live interactions and assess your chat transcripts. And most of all, role play. And then practice and have fun. This should be fun. This should be something you enjoy because you're helping your patrons get the information that they need. It's not always fun, but it should be fun. Have an aspect of fun with that. So this is your homework. These are just about 10 questions that you can practice with. And then Taylor's going to send you about 154 more in your email along with the other links. So are there, again, this is instructions for how to do a mock practice. And that's all I have. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to email me directly or email Taylor, and we will get the PowerPoint to you and the questions and the reference competency quiz that you guys, some of you didn't get. But if you have anything else, please please contact me directly. I did give you my full name and my full email right there. So some of you, I know it's funny in the chat, you said you don't like to do that, but I feel like being in the profession for 23 years, that I need to be able to give back to some of you guys and help you because I've struggled along the way, and if I can help you streamline things or make things faster, if I can give you any advice whatsoever, please don't hesitate to contact me. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, I know we're out of time, but feel free to contact me directly. Thank you guys so much for being here, and I'm sorry that some of you had to go. Thank you, Deb.
Thank you, Stephanie, for an informative webinar this morning. Attendees, if you enjoyed this webinar, we ask that you join us on May 10th for Stephanie Rollins' next webinar, Bridge the Digital Divide for Patrons with Disabilities, Ensure Accessibility. As always, we encourage you to keep an eye on the Swiftland CE calendar, the Swiftland Facebook page, or your message from the listserv. Thank you everyone for attending and have a great weekend. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Deb.